Is your birthday coming up? Or did it just pass and the only thing you felt was indifference? No emotion, no sadness, simply nothing. If you ever answered, "It's a normal day," when someone asked what you were going to do, and you watched how that answer generated more confusion than anything else you could have said, then this video was made for you. Because there's something nobody has explained to you. That calm you feel is not coldness. It is not disguised depression. It is not a sign that something failed in you. And science backs it up with decades of research in neuroscience and behavioral psychology. We live in a culture that turned birthdays into a social test. If there is no party, if there is no post, if there is no visible emotion, people assume you are broken inside. Your friends worry, your family insists, and you end up feeling stranger for being okay than for being unwell. But what psychologists have discovered by studying people like you completely changes the framework. You are not the problem. You are the most interesting data point in the experiment. In this video, you are going to understand why your brain reacts this way, which psychological group you belong to, and what that says about your real level of emotional maturity, because the answer will probably surprise you.
It all begins with an experiment that nobody expected would explain so much about everyday life. In 1967, psychologist Martin Seligman was working with dogs in a laboratory when he discovered something that would forever change the way we understand human behavior: learned helplessness. What he found was unsettling in its simplicity. When a living being repeatedly experiences disappointment over which it has no control, its brain does not collapse or rebel, it simply adapts. It stops trying. Not because it is weak, but because it learned that effort does not change the outcome, and an efficient brain does not waste energy on predictions that have historically failed. Seligman observed that even when the situation changed and escape was possible, subjects who had been conditioned to repeated failure did not even try. They stayed still. And that, translated into human experience, sounds exactly like this: it's just another day. Now, neuroscience enters, and this is where everything becomes more precise and more unsettling. Researchers Schultz, Diane, and Montague demonstrated that the brain's dopaminergic system does not work like a simple pleasure switch that activates when something good happens. It works on predictions. Your brain releases dopamine not when it receives the reward, but when it anticipates that the reward will arrive. And the most critical part, when the promised reward does not appear, the system not only fails to activate, it registers a negative prediction error, a kind of emotional debt that the brain notes with surgical precision. Imagine that as a child, you waited with genuine excitement for someone to remember your date, for someone to do something special, for that day to feel different. And it did not happen. And then the following year, the same thing. And the next. Every time that occurred, your brain updated its model of the world. Birthdays do not deliver what they promise. And a brain that learns from its data, which is exactly what yours does, eventually stops generating the anticipation. It stops releasing the dopamine. It stops building the expectation. Not because you consciously decided not to care, but because your nervous system made the decision for you, in silence, without asking your permission, years ago. So when someone asks what you're going to do for your birthday, and you respond with genuine calm, "Nothing, it's a normal day," you are not being difficult or cold or strange. You are being the exact and predictable result of what science has been documenting for decades. That phrase was not born from apathy. It was born from scars that time made invisible, but that the brain never forgot.
But not everyone who lets their birthday pass without ceremony arrives there from pain. There is a second profile, completely different from the first, and it is probably the one least talked about, because from the outside it seems inexplicable. These are people who literally do not remember that it is their birthday. They do not avoid it. They do not suppress it. They made no conscious decision about it. Their brain simply filed it away in some drawer alongside other things it did not mark as urgent, and the day came and went without anyone inside their head setting off an alarm. Cognitive psychology has a name for this: temporal blindness, a phenomenon documented in people with high cognitive load, where the perception of time and dates becomes distorted because attentional resources are completely absorbed by other demands. Researcher Russell Barkley, one of the leading experts in executive function, described how the human brain under sustained pressure literally loses the ability to monitor time accurately, not as a failure, but as prioritization. Your brain decided that what you have at hand is more important than the calendar and acted accordingly. And here is what turns out to be revealing about this group. It is not that they do not value themselves. It's exactly the opposite. They are people so committed to what they do, so absorbed by the projects, the responsibilities, and the people that matter to them, that their attention has no free space to stop on a date. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying the state he called flow, that mental condition where a person is so completely immersed in a meaningful activity that they lose all sense of time, hunger, their surroundings, and yes, also of birthdays. People who frequently experience flow are not disconnected from life, they're more inside it than most. So if you ever realized your birthday had already passed only because someone else mentioned it, and your first reaction was not sadness, but something closer to, oh, that's right, how curious, you may not be avoiding anything. You may simply be living with such intensity that a day on the calendar cannot compete with everything else that is happening inside you. It is not carelessness. It is not coldness. It is the price paid by the mind that never stops. And for many, it does not even feel like a price.
And then there is a third group that completely defies the narrative society built around celebrations. They did not forget the date. They have no wounds they are managing in silence. They are not pretending indifference to protect themselves from something. Genuinely, from a place of internal clarity, they simply do not need it. And this is where psychology stops being interesting and becomes fascinating. Edward Deci and Richard Ryan spent more than 4 decades developing what is today known as self-determination theory, one of the most solid and replicated frameworks in the history of modern psychology. Their central finding is as simple as it is radical. The psychologically healthiest human beings, those who report the greatest sustained well-being over time, are not the ones who have the most celebrations, the most external recognition, or the most social validation. They are the ones who learned to generate their sense of worth from within, from a source that does not depend on the calendar, on someone remembering, on whether there is a cake or not, on whether the phone rings or not. Their well-being is not tied to any external event because they've found something far more stable, a relationship with themselves that does not need to be confirmed by the world every certain number of months. Now add to that what researcher Philip Brickman identified decades ago with a concept that, once you understand it, you cannot stop seeing it everywhere: the hedonic treadmill. It is the psychological cycle where you pursue a celebration, an achievement, an external recognition, and when it arrives, the satisfaction is real, but brief. And almost immediately the brain recalibrates its baseline and needs the next stimulus to feel the same thing again. It is a wheel that never stops, and most people are running it without knowing they are on it. The people in the third group did not make the decision to step off that wheel in a moment of sudden enlightenment. They arrived there through a gradual process of self-knowledge, where they began to notice that the euphoria of external celebrations had a very short expiration date, while the satisfaction they built internally through their values, their authentic relationships, and their daily purpose had a completely different durability. So while the rest of the world waits for one specific day of the year to feel like they matter, to feel seen and special, these people discovered something that few take the time to look for: how to feel complete on a Wednesday for no particular reason. Not because they are superior or because they do not enjoy sharing with others, but because they stopped outsourcing their sense of wholeness. And that, according to science, is not indifference. It is one of the highest forms of psychological health that exists. Up to this point, we have talked about neuroscience, about dopamine, about psychological theories that explain why some people do not need to celebrate. And all of that is real, it is documented, and it probably resonated with you in some way. But there is a deeper layer that most videos on this topic never touch, and it is the most important one of all. Psychologist Jennifer Crocker from the University of Michigan spent years studying what she called contingencies of self-esteem, the way in which people anchor their sense of personal worth to specific external outcomes. And what she found in her research was unsettling in its precision. There are people who disconnect from celebrations, who adopt a stance of, I don't care, it's just a day, not because they have reached some elevated level of inner peace, but because they are unconsciously executing a protection strategy.
If you never admit that you want something, you can never be hurt when it does not arrive. If you lower the expectation to 0 before the day comes, the brain doesn't have to process the disappointment because technically there was never any hope to disappoint. It's an emotional architecture built not from strength, but from fear. Fear of wanting, fear of hoping, and above all, fear that the absence of celebration will confirm something that person already suspects about their own worth.
And here is where you need to stop and ask yourself the uncomfortable question, the one that requires real honesty. From which place are you operating? Because there is an enormous difference, both clinically and emotionally significant, between the person who genuinely does not need external recognition because they built a solid internal source of self-esteem, and the person who says they do not need it because admitting it would be too vulnerable, too risky, too exposed. The first lives from abundance. The second lives from the anticipation of pain. And the problem is that from the outside, both people look exactly the same. Both say it's just a day. Both let the date pass without ceremony. Both seem to be fine. But on the inside, the experience is radically different. Crocker found that people whose self-esteem depends on external contingencies, being remembered, being celebrated, being seen, but who suppress that desire instead of resolving it, accumulate an emotional burden that eventually manifests in other ways, in relationships where they always give more than they receive, in a chronic difficulty asking for what they need, in a vague but persistent feeling that something is missing without being able to name exactly what. Only you know, with real honesty, which of the two places you are in. And the fact that you are willing to ask yourself that question right now already says more about you than any answer you could give. What science does with all of this is hand you a mirror. From Seligman's learned helplessness to dopaminergic prediction errors, from temporal blindness to Ryan and Deshi's self-determination theory, and the contingencies of self-esteem that Crocker documented with clinical precision, everything points toward the same conclusion that nobody had given you permission to consider, that the way you relate to your birthday is not an accident or a flaw. It is the direct result of your neurological history and your emotional architecture. People who do not need external celebration are not cold or broken. They represent what psychology defines as real emotional maturity, and those who do desire it but do not allow themselves to admit it are not broken either. They are protected, which is different. And naming that difference without judgment is already an act of freedom, because the question was never whether you should celebrate your birthday. The real question, the one that is truly worth answering, is whether you were giving yourself permission to want what you genuinely want, and whether the calm you feel comes from wholeness, or whether it still comes from fear. If you made it this far, something in this content resonated with a part of you that rarely finds words that describe it with precision, and that is not a coincidence. What science demonstrated today, with decades of real research behind it, is that the way you relate to your birthday is not a flaw or an oddity. It is the direct result of your neurological history and your level of emotional maturity, and that deserves to be understood, not corrected. If you ever let that date pass in silence and what you felt was peace, welcome to a tribe that does not need noise to know it is whole. And if something stirred inside you while you watch this video, that is also valuable, because recognizing yourself is always the first step towards something freer. Subscribe if you want to keep having this kind of conversation, the ones that genuinely give you something useful back about yourself. And before you go, leave me your most honest answer in the comments. Did you ever spend a birthday completely alone and feel at peace? Or is there still a part of you that, almost without showing it, keeps waiting for something different? See you in the next video.